Welcome to the Best of Bumper to Bumper podcast. I'm Justin Gard. This is the Best of Bumper to Bumper on Monday, May 18th. If you're looking for the entire show podcast, it's available on this very same channel. Hope you had a great weekend. Interesting show today. We believe a lot of Last Dance documentary talk as parts 9 and 10 aired on Sunday evening. Jonny Athletic's going to talk about that. We'll also open the show with that in just a minute. And Paul Blume, Fox 9, joins to give us the latest from Albany, Minnesota, as a bar and restaurant owner was about to open to the public today until the Attorney General and some others stepped in. Blumey, as we call him, coming up in a minute. But we started the show on Monday talking Last Dance documentary and Michael Jordan.
I am delighted, as I mentioned, we are indeed your pick your poison leader, because in the wake of parts 9 and 10 of The Last Dance, much conversation having to do with the famous Jordan, well, up till now it's been called the flu game. And from this point forward, it might well be called the food poisoning game, although I'm assuming somebody's come up with a name that's got a better ring to it than that, depending on which conspiracy theory you want to believe. And, of course, it was Game 5 of the 97 finals, I believe.
Yes.
If I'm not mistaken, in which Michael basically acted by the end of the game as if he was dead, but still had a mythic performance, was literally carried off the floor by Scottie Pippen for a late timeout, and the Bulls won that game. They went on to win that NBA Finals against the Utah Jazz as well. And we learned from Michael last night and from his right-hand, I guess you could say, athletic trainer guy, Tim Grover, that he was hungry late, was Michael. And we couldn't. It's hard for me to believe, by the way, that room service would not open for Michael Jordan. I'm a little skeptical of that, but okay, maybe that was true at Salt Lake. Maybe they got rules in Salt Lake about that. In any case, the claim is, if you missed it, they ordered out for a pizza.
They found the one place that was open.
They found the one place that was open. 5, like a gang of delivery people apparently showed up trying to look into the room, and they delivered the pizza. And as it was explained by Michael, I think Michael was the only one who ate any of it.
Yeah.
No one, I guess everyone else was either afraid to eat some or say, if Michael wants the whole pizza, it's Michael. Let him have the whole pizza.
That was my favorite tweet off of that last night. Was somebody said, when Michael said, I ate the pizza, no one else ate the pizza, I ate the whole pizza.
Yeah.
All of us now can finally relate to Michael Jordan. It's the only time any of us have ever been able to relate to him, eating an entire pizza by ourselves.
Grover says that he immediately had a bad feeling about the pizza. That could be
the whole thing is fishy.
It could be convenient because did he say it really then, or is he saying it now? Bottom line is he gets sick as a dog, at least according to the story, and it has prompted, and then he follows up with one of the mythic performances, healthy or unhealthy. I mean, it added another layer to it. I think I was at that game. I think we talked about that before, and it did add another layer to it. There's no question about it. But it was a ridiculous clutch performance by MJ again, and it's led to two thoughts for me. I mean, one is that, like everything else, this new information has become very polarizing, to the extent that now people are saying, oh, was food poisoning? Well, that's not as mythic as what I thought it was before, the flu. And I'm kind of scratching my head on that one because, to me, it's a little bit of a distinction without a difference. And, in fact, I would argue if you really are retching and throwing up on the bowl as much as he claimed he was, curled up in the fetal position at some juncture in the Jordan bathroom. By the way, did he have the piano that year, or was it a different year he had the piano in his room?
I think it was the other second year.
Yeah,
98.
Second.
May have been both.
I'm shocked, actually, given how much he threw up. I wouldn't want to try. What if he throws up again, ruins the piano? But in any case, I digress. That's become the new battle. Other people getting defensive about, well, throwing up's actually a lot worse, as if Michael needs added defense to somehow keep his legendary status intact. But that's what it's turned into. What's more mythic? Overcoming the flu and presumably, I don't know, a temperature of 108, whatever, or stomach flu, or I should say in this case food poisoning, as opposed to an illness. And I would call it, if you're retching to that degree and you're dehydrated to that degree, it's a distinction, not a difference. Here's the other thing that's coming to my head that I need help from you on and the audience on as well. Do we have, what would be classified as the most mythic Minnesota sports performance under duress? Whether it is mental or physical. Bad flu, bad, again, pizza, bad pepperoni pizza. By the way, they didn't really say what was on the pizza, what the toppings were. I have a ton of questions about that whole thing. Yeah, well, I know you think Jordan did it to himself.
Well, we know, first of all, can we prove that he didn't?
No, we can't rule it out. I grant you that
As
point.
a guy who achieved everything and all he had were challenges conquered.
Yeah.
Why not?
That's possible.
You're in Salt Lake. There's nothing to do. You can't find a restaurant. Who knows?
Do we have one?
Well, here's the problem.
I couldn't. I even sent out feelers to some local Minnesota sports historians.
Yeah.
I have no idea. I couldn't come up with that, and I didn't look. I'll admit I didn't look hard, but I couldn't. Off the top of my head, I know there has to be some, but then again, the game also has to be significant. I mean, if you overcome the flu or 105 temperature to help a team win, your team win in the regular season, I'm not sure that's going to be all that interesting to me. But
no.
Do we have any?
Well, here's the thing.
Fatal flaw?
Fatal flaw for us is we don't have a lot of championships.
No, we don't. But we got a couple.
So
was there anything from the Twins?
I don't know, but the one I'm thinking of.
Did Jack Morris throw up the night before the game? I've never asked him that question.
What about Frankie Sweet Music
How
Viola?
about a bloody sock?
No.
Did he have to play despite wearing like some sort of open? Did he pitch into the 10th inning despite an open wound?
I think he would have told us.
On his foot?
What I think, though, is what I think of immediately in terms of physical duress is what Favre did in New Orleans.
Yeah.
Basically breaking his ankle. We saw the picture a week later. He sent out the picture where his whole leg is purple, basically, from the ankle all the way up.
Yeah.
But we lost that game.
We did. That's
as he played before 12 men across the body.
Yeah, our options are limited unless we want to go back to the Minneapolis Lakers.
Yeah.
When I'm guessing George Mikan played with a tummy ache a couple of times and still won titles.
What about...
there might be a couple of those stories. What
about Courtney James having to perform after writing the greatest paper on PMS that was ever written in the San Antonio hotel room?
He was basically locked into his room to finish that paper. And then he followed that up with the what victory was that? That would have been the
UCLA.
UCLA, that's right.
The Elite Eight.
Yeah, you're right.
After the Clemson game.
After the Clemson game that Bobby Jackson won for us.
One of the great games
Pretty
ever.
much.
Yeah.
There's no doubt about it. That didn't happen, but it was a great game.
So to answer your question, I don't have one off the top of my head. Well, Eric Harris had to gut through the Elite Eight. He had a separated shoulder.
Yeah, that might be we can at least throw out ideas because none came to my head immediately. And believe me, as an ink-stained wretch, we love to milk those stories. And if I had one like that, I know I would have milked it. Now, I've forgotten a lot more than I remember about what I've written, and I've told you this several times. You think it's humble bragging. It's not. I forget which games I'm at and which I'm not. And part of the reason I don't assume I'm at certain games is because I don't want to act as if I was there when I wasn't. And then you remind me, well, no, you were at that game. It's okay. You can actually recollect if you possibly can.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. Yeah, I mean, we're at disadvantages. All of the disadvantages are fairly obvious. We've never had a run like that. In our winter sports, pro sports, we haven't even come close to having a run like that. The Vikings have never had a run like that. They've never, won it. But I dare say if you win an NFL title, which we did under Bud Grant, maybe there's a story back there. Although it goes back so far, it probably wouldn't matter to people. And regular season, I'm sure there's several because everybody has to play hurt to a certain extent or sick to a certain extent. But I'm hoping there's a hidden gem that I've either forgotten or never knew about that we can at least discuss. Because 87 91 Twins, nothing, as you say, nothing comes quickly to my mind indicating that we rose above great illness. Bubonic plague. Puck had bubonic plague the night he goes and makes that great catch against the plexiglass. I don't think we have many of those.
I know the year that the Lynx beat Indiana when Maya hit that shot in Game 3 in Indiana. I know that Whalen's was basically dead that whole time.
Yes,
she had to go through
brought up.
the whole thing that whole time. And
well, how about didn't she come back from injury?
The Final Four.
For the Final Four run, right?
I mean, she broke her wrist, I want to say, and missed the last 7 or 8 games. That's why they were a 7 seed, but still got to host because they were hosting a region. They were underseeded at 7 because Whalen missed the last month or 2 months of the season and came back. They weren't even sure she was going to be back for the NCAA tournament. Scored 32, I think, against UCLA in the first round.
That sounds good.
And then went to the Final Four, 2004.
I'm curious. Some interesting suggestions are coming in, which we will at least consider. As I said, Bradshaw and Brian inbox is Booth, BOOTH at KFAN.com. And we will give you, as I said, the guest lineup. We'll give you some thoughts also regarding the now end of The Last Dance. There are no more parts that we're aware of, right? I mean, there's nothing there's nothing on the cutting room floor. They say we're going to milk some more out of this because we've had such good numbers and such good reaction to it.
I do know there's that show, it's called Details or whatever, that's on ESPN Plus, that's more about the 98 season. But in terms of the Jordan stuff, I think that's done.
Percy Harvin migraines do anything for you?
That's every game, apparently.
Yeah.
Almost.
So to that extent, couldn't you say that in of itself is heroic? Although it didn't lead us anywhere from a championship standpoint. Emailer Christopher isn't playing for is it Christopher? It's either Christopher or Matthew. He's got 2 names here. Isn't playing for a Minnesota sports franchise under duress enough for you, Dan? Very well played.
More MJ talk coming up in just a little bit with Jonny Athletic and throughout the rest of the week. We've had a lot of good Last Dance documentary guests on the last month or so. You can find all of those on the Best of podcast. But Paul Blume, Fox 9, reached out today because he was on his way to Stearns County, to Albany, Minnesota, to chronicle what is the A topic in the news world today. The bar and restaurant owner in Albany that was basically going to try to open up today and had a crowd of hundreds in Main Street, Albany, ready to come into his restaurant. Here's our guy, Paul Blume, Fox 9, with the latest.
Are you still Dateline, Albany, Minnesota?
I am. I'm sitting across the street from Shady's Hometown Tavern, which still remains the doors shut in terms of going inside, but still a pretty good crowd. It's almost turned into a little bit of a, I hate to say it, but a Make America Great Again rally, both on the sidewalk and the park right across the street. But you're right, lead story tonight on a day where more of Minnesota opened up, right? More retail stores, more malls. The business is back to normal. It's not normal, but, a new normal in some places. But, today's headline, I saw the newspapers running with it at the top of their website this afternoon. But it's the business that wanted to open but couldn't that's topping the news headlines.
Chris Schiffler, the owner, he had made clear, I think over the weekend, I'm opening. I don't care what anybody says or does. He announced, I think, earlier today that he was not going to open. Update the listeners who maybe have been away from this story about the sequence that led to him reversing his field, at least for now.
Sure. So last week, as cited in the Attorney General's brief with the courts, actually spoke out to Fox 9, my colleague Sarah Danick. Also very frontal on Facebook. Chris Schiffler, the owner of this bar, specifically Shady's, he owns half a dozen bars and restaurants kind of throughout Stearns County. He said, despite the fact the governor has extended the bar and tavern shutdown through at least June 1st, he was going to open at noon today. So crowds descended. I would say a couple hundred, 200-300 people had gathered outside his doors in advance of this noontime bar opening where people would get inside, presumably to have a beer, a burger, whatever's on the menu. And minutes before, at about 11:55, he came out with a bullhorn and announced somewhat tearfully that he was not going to open his establishment. And what had happened over the weekend is the Attorney General preemptively, Keith Ellison, went to court, filed suit, asking for an immediate injunction to stop him from opening his doors. And early this morning, a judge here in Stearns County issued that injunction, basically telling him, you open up, you're violating the law, and, presumably fines. I read the order. I don't want to say he risked jail time or anything, but he was risking, a court order at this point. So the doors have to remain shut. There will be arguments heard on this matter on May 22nd, so in a few days here, where the lawyers will hash it out. But for right now, he did have to keep his doors closed. But what's happened is he's still allowed to serve, walk up. So his staff was circulating menus. He can sell off-site beer. So the crowds have still, come and continue to come throughout the afternoon. He's clearly making a few bucks today. He's also hawking some Shady's merchandise on the sidewalk.
Albany is, about 80 or 90 miles northwest of the Twin Cities. Is that correct?
Correct. Beyond St. Cloud if you're driving up I-94. And then worth pointing out, as the Attorney General does, Stearns County is one of your hot spots for COVID-19 right now. A lot of the meat processing plants and St. Cloud itself responsible for some of that type of situation. But the Attorney General made clear in his court arguments that this is not a spot where you should be messing with COVID-19. You may think Albany rural, out of, way out of in the woods or something, or out way out state. But the Attorney General made it clear that this area needs to, it's an important spot to govern by the governor's public health orders right now. And certainly a judge agreed this morning, at least in some part, wanting to hear oral arguments. But for now, yes, Shady's remains closed.
Population, I think, of about 2,700 as well, so a fairly small town. I'm sure you've talked to a lot of people and tried to garner reaction. How would you sum that up? What have you heard from the average rube?
The average rube on Railroad Avenue here, it's Albany's main street. It's cute small town Minnesota. They're angry, right? These people are upset. Several bar owners from across the region had kind of descended, thinking, they follow this guy's blueprint, Chris Schiffler, and if he's opening today, I interviewed one gentleman who's got a bar up in the Brainerd Lakes area. He basically said, Paul, I have between Memorial Day and Labor Day to make bank. People came up for the fishing opener. Brainerd's packed. I can't open my bar or restaurant right now. It's not fair. And what I hear about a lot on this main street is this idea, right? These are all mom and pop, small time shops. You hear the arguments about, look, the big box stores have been open throughout. You can go to Target. You can go into Menards. You can, go into Home Depot. The local flower shop had been closed up until the, recent days. There's frustration here, and, we heard it. And, the judge made his order today. The Attorney General has made clear these orders are in place for a reason, and he's going to enforce them, and he's going to go to court to make sure the Walz administration has some power with their pandemic orders right now.
Is there any, and I don't know if you're how wide a scope you're able to carve out where you are, but is there reason to believe that there are going to be other owners who are going to try to test the governor on this, or push the envelope, or even try to get into court to try to challenge some things, whether they have much of a chance or not? Is this a one-shot deal, or are we going to hear from others, do you think?
There are certainly others. I don't, have names and locations, but certainly in the Attorney General's, right through of their news releases made it sound there were other establishments that were eyeing it. The gentleman I spoke to, a Big Al from Big Al's in the Brainerd Lakes area, give him a little shout out. But he was planning on Friday in advance of another, Brainerd Lake. Well, of course, Memorial Day weekend, the long weekend, and he's just watching traffic go by. So he was planning to open on Friday. Obviously, June 1 has been the date the Walz administration has targeted, hopefully to open, but certainly to get the proper protocols and safety guidelines in place for bars and restaurants. But, Shady's owner, Chris Schiffler, says he's got it in place. He's spread out his tables. He's willing to let in a smaller crowd. He's got the hand sanitizer everywhere. He took his staff's temperature today in anticipation of people coming inside his establishment. And, if you've seen the photos, I tweeted a couple of video clips from the scene today. If you've seen the photos in the newspaper online,
yeah.
I mean, that crowd of 200-300, did not care this morning about social distancing. I saw maybe half a dozen masks in the group. These people want to be given their own choice, and their choice is to come to a bar today, at least to have a beer or a burger or be together. And, that's what they want. And then they don't feel they're getting that from their governor and this administration at this point.
We are chatting with our guy, Paul Blume, Fox 9, who is covering what probably would be the A news topic, the announcement that the apparent showdown in Stearns County ends with the bar owner, Chris Schiffler, saying, I'm not going to cross the courts in this regard. We will not open as he had proclaimed he would do. I believe doesn't he own like about 6 restaurants and bars? Is that correct?
Half a dozen. He I don't know exactly his specificity with which ones he was going to open today. He certainly was targeting his flagship. This is his largest business, again, right on Railroad Avenue, downtown Albany. It's also kind of an event center. But worth pointing out here, he has a GoFundMe that launched in recent days to help him. He promised it was just for legal fees, and anything above and beyond that's raised beyond his legal fees would go to other small businesses in need. But it has now raised $200,000 in just a few days. That's some coin. And I asked him, in an interview today, why not keep challenging it, right? And he talked about it. I have no idea if he's knows what he's talking about. He acknowledges he's not a lawyer, but he didn't want to lose everything right here, right now. He had no idea, what consequences if he did allow people in. But he now has some money to fight this in court. The arguments are coming in a few days orally. That we'll hear, and we'll see what a judge eventually does. But obviously across the border in Wisconsin, different circumstances. But that, Supreme Court threw out the governor's order, at least in some respects. So we'll see how far Chris wants to take this. He certainly has some funding now to do what's necessary. But again, you're up against a June 1 deadline where perhaps bars and restaurants would open anyway. And is this fight really going to last much longer, than a week?
Well, as you said, and that's what's going to be interesting what the details will be, because the governor, I do think, is getting in an increasingly ticklish situation here where he kind of needs to thread the needle. And that to the extent that some of this frustration, especially as it applies to small businesses, and you could say even businesses that weren't restaurants before this recent dialing up or dialing down that was just announced by the governor late last week. I think a lot of people can relate to some of the frustration, what seem to be some inconsistencies as pertains to the Targets of the world, Costco's of the world, Home Depot's of the world, allegedly with some important stuff. That's why they were still open, essential stuff. But these huge stores still open, and parking lots, Paul, when I'd see them, jammed.
Oh.
I mean, just utterly jammed. And so if you're the average small business person, and now in this case, restaurant, obviously, I get some of the frustration, and I think that's in part why the governor knows, they're going to have to come up with something here to I think, attempt to satisfy some of that, or at least to ease some of that frustration that's out there, as difficult a challenge as this is for whoever's in charge about, all right, what should we open? What should we do in the name of safety, et cetera, et cetera. The consistency issue, I think, is one that has been, I think, the toughest for him to battle.
I would agree fully. And again, just anecdotally, the flower shop on this Main Street in Albany, that was forced to be closed when someone can walk into a Home Depot. And, I've gone in to pick up some, home improvement supplies, and these stores are packed. And, there is a legitimate argument, to be made here on Main Street. Obviously, my gut is the governor does not personally want to, crush small businesses here, but you're right. It is a needle that has to be thread, and the frustration is growing. And, I got a sense of it today, an hour and a half removed from the metro, so a different, population base that I'm accustomed to, circulating with, on a day-to-day basis. But, yeah, people are calling for at least them to make their own decisions. These stores, no one's trying to say we can just, go about our business, return to normal as is. Business owners have protocols, willingness to, stand outside for a few extra minutes if you're going to limit the number of people inside. I mean, there are some things that people are willing to do. It's just they want the opportunity to be given the chance to do those things.
Did Chris Schiffler, the owner of Shady's, did he acknowledge at all the fact that the numbers in a relatively, like you say, small community, well, Stearns County, I guess, a little more widely, are, from a per capita standpoint, pretty high? Was there any acknowledgement of, all right, that does make things in this particular spot potentially a little bit more problematic to open?
Yeah, I didn't specifically ask that question. I don't want to put words into his mouth, but I mean, he cares about his livelihood. He says he can't survive without opening. Pick up takeout orders just aren't cutting it. He has staff he wants to pay. He got emotional talking about his staff. But, I heard one of his loyal customers in line as we were talking with him kind of mentioned that, look, you see anybody from a senior center here? We can come in and have our meal or have our beer. And, there is this element of this feeling of, this disease is targeting perhaps one segment of the population. And, if you can, if there's an order that, the elderly can't come out to his bar or restaurant, certainly they're willing to hear that. But, again, this desire to kind of want to do, what people want to do and spend their money where they want to spend their money. Now, today a little bit probably of a show, right? He targeted this noon opening on Facebook. He'd made gone on TV about it. So this, I grant you, I came to a little bit of a dog and, pony show in and of itself. But at the heart of it, you had a business owner who wants to open, who wants to pay staff, who wants to be able to make rent, and he sees a way. Again, he put in some protocols. He says he's ready to go, and he wants that opportunity.
Last item for you, and I want to put you in a position where you have to be the ultimate social distancing arbiter. But in this process of trying to calculate, all right, what should be open, what shouldn't, what kind of prudent decisions can a governor make, should a governor make, et cetera, is the in general to this point, give me what the working theory is on the distinction between businesses opening and restaurants. Is it that in a restaurant, you're going to have people not moving in the same place for as long as it takes them to eat, for example, and that's what makes, even if the tables are spaced, that's what makes that different than saying, Ridgedale, you want to open up? Go ahead. Galleria, you want to open up, and people can circulate through. Is that the distinction that has been drawn to this point, do you think?
That's a great point. I saw Tom Lyden, my colleague, had a story last night where, the time in a restaurant, in terms of the airflow and how important that is. Food processing, food, people in the food in the back in the kitchen as they walk through the restaurant. What does that look like? I certainly, it's not an area of expertise for myself. You get into gyms and then hair salons as well. We heard, and don't forget the hairstylists today out here. So, it's just difficult. Obviously, the more, the closer people are together in a closed environment, I think the greater the risk. And, the public health officials are setting these guidelines and protocols for a reason. They want to be safe. It's just, I saw today clearly, and it didn't come as a shock to me, but there are a lot of people frustrated and frankly angry that this is the system they're living in right now, and whether they don't feel this disease has touched them specifically, or there are better ways to fight it. Whatever the reason is, people are getting agitated, and of course, it's become political as everything does here. So this, again, kind of felt like at times, almost like a Trump rally outside.
Thanks as always, Blume. I'm assuming you'll be all over the 5 o'clock, the 6 o'clock, the 7 o'clock, the 9 o'clock, and the 10 o'clock, right? I got to believe you're going to be front and center on all of those.
The story will air throughout the Fox 9 evening of newscasts, whether or not I remain live in Albany as the crowd dwindles. We will see. But, yes, the story will be all over Fox 9 tonight. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being on with us on short notice once again. We appreciate it, man. Take care.
Thank you. You too, Dan.
Be good. That's Paul Blume, Fox 9 from Albany, Minnesota.
Paul Blume, Fox 9, always on the scene of the big stories and always terrific in summarizing them for us. We wrap up Monday's Best of podcast with our guy, Jonny Athletic.
It's time for Jonny Athletic. Jonny Athletic. Jonny Athletic. And he's on with Dan Barreiro right now.
Johnny's still relatively a young pup, but he might be able to help us with our challenge that we issued in the first hour of today's broadcast. Johnny is on the Whiting Clinic LASIK and Cataract Opal hotline. A lot of talk last night and today about the Jordan, formerly known as flu game, now known as, if you believe the conspiracy, food poisoning game. And we were trying to muster up what would be, in Minnesota sports history, among the greatest examples of mythic overcoming of some great medical obstacle to, win a championship really limits us because we don't have a lot of those, but at least to win a really, 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 really big game. And we got a lot of good snarky responses and a couple serious ones. Maybe the best serious one was from Guardsy, the far across the body game, where he got, his body just got abused. And he kept going back out there, and he would not take no for an answer, but ultimately we lost. So any come to mind in your career that we might not quite match Michael, but at least get us in the ballpark?
Yeah, I'm trying to think about that right now off the top of my head. I'll go. One was a stirring post-game performance because after Corey Brewer scored 51 points in a game for the Wolves, shockingly, he was asked to take a drug test after the game, and he was so dehydrated that it took him literally like an hour and a half to be able to urinate. So we had to wait forever and ever for him to interview him after this historic game of his. So that was a gutsy performance. Yeah. But the one thing that maybe some Wolves fans don't want to hear, but I mean, certainly Jimmy Butler kind of rushing back from knee surgery to play at the end of the one full season that he did with the Timberwolves and get this team into the playoffs.
Yeah,
played
right.
in game 82 where they had to win the game to get into the playoffs. That was one of the more impressive things that I've seen a player do.
Does that get canceled? Does that get canceled out later though by missing games because of general soreness? That's the problem.
Yeah, I think so. If this is a cumulative effort, he's going to probably come out on the wrong end. But if we're looking for one singular performance, that's it. I'm trying to think of, Dan. I'm having a hard time thinking of. I'm sure there's got to be some Vikings. Performances that Jim Kleinsasser played with every kind of malady you could ever think of. Yeah. Jim Marshall, if you heard, back in the day, if you heard Fred Zamberletti tell about stories about him and what he had to play through, I mean, those are legendary, but I don't think of any like Willis Reed, Michael Jordan things just right off the top of my head like that in such a big game. No, we just haven't had that many years.
Here's what's sad. I had texted Patrick Royce earlier today. He's been working this hard for me, which I appreciate, but it's kind of instructive that the examples he came up with are from 1951, 1959, 1965 was the latest he could come up with, and I say, well, that's kind of tells us we're pretty desperate, and we're not going to probably be able to swim in these very, very deep waters.
Yeah, the sample size of championship moments is pretty small, and so I think all the Lynx were relatively healthy as they won their championships. I mean, they may have had some bumps and bruises, but I don't remember Maya Moore ever being on her deathbed or anything like that. So, yeah, we just haven't had many bites at this apple. So the Favre one may be as close as we can get, and that wasn't a loss, as you point out. So yeah, just I'll keep digging though. If something comes to mind, I'll definitely let you know.
Yeah, please let us know. It would be extremely helpful. Parts 9 and 10 last night. What stuck out? What stood out to you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just trying to think back to those 2 episodes. I think that some people actually maybe forget how good that Utah team was, and I think they did, give the Bulls some problems. So it wasn't exactly the cakewalk that I had kind of remembered when I thought back on it. I mean, the other thing was the very end when they talked about Phil Jackson, making all of the players kind of write down what was important and getting together and burning it in a coffee can. It's like the most Zen master moment of all Zen master moments you could think of. And I'm just trying to think of if I could have been in that room and listened to Michael Jordan read his poem and Phil do his and Rodman and all these things, what a moment that would have been.
Well, it's funny. Apparently Jackson, I think this was a story that Guardsy gave to me or linked for me last night. Jackson also had that tradition of at the beginning of the season, or even I think the beginning of training camp, he liked to give each player a book to read. Mm-hmm. And the quote somewhere in there was, well, I didn't, and he had good examples of how he tried to match up books with individuals. He said, but in the case of Michael and Scotty, he said, really didn't matter. They didn't read books, so I just pretty much give them whatever I had left over. Rather dismissive in that way that Phil Jackson could sometimes be dismissive.
Yeah, that's kind of the way that he rolls. Yes. But the other thing I was thinking about here, Dan, is kind of I think that early on, especially in this series, there was, I think, a demonizing of Jerry Krause, and that certainly carried through a lot of the documentary, as it was his fault that this thing kind of fell apart. But I just got the impression at the end, especially from Phil, that this was over. Like they had reached the point of physical and mental exhaustion that, everyone, you always ask, how could you not keep that team together? What was happening? And Reinsdorf, says in the piece that he offered Phil to come back as kind of this last ditch effort to see if there still was something salvageable. And Phil just said no. And, Rodman was cooked and Pippen was going to go get his money. And, just the energy and the capital that you have to spend to go on runs like that, especially now, but definitely back then too. And what it takes out of you, I think that thing died of natural causes as much as it did any kind of ego-driven drama behind the scenes that may have happened between Krause and Phil, or Krause and Scotty and MJ, or whatever it was. It was just that team had given everything it had, and I don't know that it had a whole lot more.
It's definitely worth pointing out. You could make the argument, in fact, that these guys all liked having Krause and or Reinsdorf as the boogeymen because it made them, they could sort of hide behind that, where deep down they might have all been relieved that this is, just as well, because I could pretend that I was up for it. But I will say, I came away from the last part believing more than ever that Jordan might have hung for another one.
Yes.
And that Reinsdorf, more than Krause, is the villain. And I do think there is understandable frustration in Chicago, or would be anywhere, wherever that dynasty was ensuing, was playing out, in that Reinsdorf made it sound like, wow, I couldn't get all these guys to come back together. There's too much money. They're all going to want too much money. And it's like, well, is that the way to present this? Because in effect, what you're saying, you're almost making it sound like you don't even want to try. You don't even want to try to be creative. You don't even want to try to come up with some ways where, okay, well, maybe we lose this guy, but maybe we add this guy too, and we can kind of keep the whole band together. To me, Reinsdorf came off more what Charles Barkley said, that it's more him than Krause, some of it money, and some of it on his part seemingly not willing to be, let's get our creative minds together And let's at least exhaust the possibilities and see if we can come up with a way to piece this thing back together. And it was almost like he didn't want to even listen to that. He wanted to be sure it ended. And so even when he called Phil and said, hey, you know what? You've earned the right if you want to come back. If I were Phil, I would have reacted the same way he did, which was almost like, nah. I don't even think that Reinsdorf came off as that sincere. And Jackson probably figured that out as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think that when you watch the whole documentary and all of the people who were featured at any length in their interviews, I thought Reinsdorf came off as the most disingenuous and kind of stiff and wooden character of the group. And so I think you absolutely can make that argument. And here's the other thing is when you have the greatest player of all time, there just should be this effort to maximize everything you can get out of him and believe that he is so good that you can bring other players through. Look, Steve Kerr was a very good player. Several other role players were really quality guys that helped out Ron Harper and those guys. But to say that, well, we couldn't pay Steve Kerr, so there's no replacing him. Well, you could have found someone else. You could have found another shooter. Correct. To come in and play it. Now, the one guy is Pippen. Like, yes, I think that he did want out. He was going to go get his money. And as much as Jordan said he could have talked Pippen to coming back in, I don't know that that's the case. That would have been really difficult to fill that shoe. But you always know that in the NBA, the very hardest thing to find is a true number one star. And they had the number one of all number one stars still playing at an extremely high level. And for that, you would think that you would get as creative as you possibly could to extend that window as far as you could.
Jonny Athletic helps us wrap up the Best of Bumper to Bumper podcast on Monday, May 18th. If you want the second segment with Jonny Athletic, where we odied Fred Willard, among others, and talked a little bit more about the MJ doc, it's available on this very same channel, the entire show podcast. Thanks for finding us tonight. Don't forget, on Tuesday's show, we continue our Legends with Lou Nanne series with Mike Doc Emmerich, legendary hockey play-by-play guy. Going to be some great stories from Doc. Can't wait for that. You can listen live, stream it, 5:15 tomorrow with our Legends with Lou series, 5:15 on Tuesday. Stay safe, everybody. Thanks for finding us. We'll talk to you Tuesday on Bumper to Bumper.